Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to our fourth and last lecture in the Yiddish in Transit series. Today, we explore Yiddish lullabies as the most intimate form of cultural transmission in Jewish life, vessels of memory and identity passed from one generation to another through the mother's voice in the darkness. Let's begin with our first lullaby or folk song, Schlaf mein Kind, Sleep my Child, dating from 1892 with music by David Kovanovsky. This text was included in the first major collection of Yiddish folk songs, compiled by Ginsburg and Marek in 1901. It captures one of the most seminal experiences of modern Jewish life, mass migration. And though it is a folk song, or maybe we should say a folk song, its author is well known. In our previous talk, we already met Sholem Aleichem as a Yiddish writer and as a writer, or maybe the writer, of Jewish migration to America. We also discussed Devorah, Yudalet Berkovich's elderly woman protagonist, versus Motel, Sholem Aleichem's young and cheerful protagonist, and their different views on the possibilities and limitations of Jewish migration. And today, we meet Sholem Aleichem as a writer in another genre, the lullaby or the folk song. Sholem Aleichem wrote this song in 1892, when Jewish migration from the Russian Empire was growing, though it hadn't reached its peak yet. So first, let's read the Yiddish original. Schlaf mein Kind, mein Trest, mein Scheiner, schlaf je lu, schlaf mein Leben, mein Kaddish einer, schlaf je junenju. Bei dein Wiegel sitzt dein Mame, singt ein Lied und weint. Wirst einmal verstehen, Mistome, was sie hat gemeint. In Amerika ist der Tate deiner Sonnenju. Du bist nur ein Kindlesasse, schlaf je, Julju. Das Amerika ist für jeden, sagt man, gora Glick und für jeden a Gan Eden, etwas an Antik. Dorten esst man in der Woche Chale, Junenju. Jechalach will ich dir kochen, schlaf je, schlaf, Julju. Wird schicken $20, sein Porträt dazu. Und wird nehmen, leben soll uns ahin zu. Bis es kommt das gute Quittel, schlaf je, Junenju. Schlafen ist ein teuer Mittel. Schlaf je, Liu. And you can see Sholem Aleichem's own handwriting and autograph below the corrections in the text from 1908, after the 1901 edition was published, of course. And this is really his most famous autograph, appearing in many of his letters and notes and texts. Even if you don't read Yiddish or couldn't understand the words, you must have recognized the word America throughout the song. Indeed, this is a song about migration and about the Jewish family upon migration. Let's turn now to the English translation. Sleep, my child, my comfort, my beauty. Sleep, Lulu, lullaby. Sleep, my life, my only Kaddish. Sleep, my little son. Your mother is sitting by your cradle, singing a song and weeping. Perhaps you'll understand someday what you were thinking. Father is in America. Your father, my son. Meanwhile, you're still a child. So sleep, sleep, lullaby. America is for everyone, they say, great good fortune, and the paradise for the Jews, something extraordinary. There, even during the week, they eat challah, my little son. I'll cook chicken soup for you, my sleepy, sleepy lullaby. He will send us $20 and his photograph too, and he will, may he lives, take us to him there. Until the good voucher comes, sleep, my little son. Sleep is a precious remedy, so sleep, sleep, lullaby. Let's discuss and unfold the song. So first, the scene. This is a Viglied, a lullaby. There is a mother and a child, and she is singing to him as he falls asleep. The missing character is in this little family is the father, who, as we learn, went to America. What we have here is a miniature of a family, the mother, the father, and the child. But this little triangle is missing one side. If you remember, in one of our previous lectures, we discussed this migration pattern, where the head of the family, usually the father, moved to America, and the rest of the family remained in the Russian Empire or the Austro-Hungarian Empire or Romania until he could save enough money to bring them over. So here we see a lyric expression of this historical phenomenon. We can also see here the high expectations from America, a place with white bread, chicken soup, representing economic prosperity and political freedom, a paradise for anyone, but especially for Jews. Of course, these expectations are juxtaposed with the harsh reality in the old country, where poverty, anti-Jewish legislation, and harsh social conditions were the reasons for immigration in the first place. Now let's hear a little part of the song. I'm sure many of you recognize the notes. Maybe you heard this lullaby as children. Maybe you sang it yourself to your children. It really is a well-known Yiddish lullaby. One of the most interesting things about this song is how soon did Sholem Aleichem recognize the connection between mass migration and the crisis of the Jewish family, and how soon he articulated it in a poetic manner. It was only 1892 when he wrote the song, and already he is pointing to the core of this historical and social phenomenon, which would be much more crucial in the decades to come. Notice also the day-to-day details in the song. The bread, the chicken soup, and the $20, his photograph, that good voucher or ticket. These are the mechanisms of transatlantic migration in the 1880s to the 1910s. The system that was a lifeline connecting families split across oceans. The husband in New York or Chicago or wherever would send money home. $20 in 1892 was a significant sum. It represented hope and means for living for the family that remained behind. The photograph is equally important. For families separated by an ocean, it sometimes became the only way to remember a face, to show a child what their father looked like. And above all, das gute Quittel, the good note, the approval to live, or the prepaid ticket, the document that could reunite the family. But in the East European Jewish traditional context, a gut Quittel is also a greeting used between Yom Kippur and Hoshana Rabbah. Although Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is the Day of Judgment, Hoshana Rabbah is when the final verdict is signed. By referring to this greeting of a gut Quittel, Shalom Aleichem adds to the song another dimension, a sense of a critical moment in life. And since I mentioned Shalom Aleichem again, it is also interesting to note his search for the right or the most suitable protagonist to carry the narrative of Jewish migration. In this poem, from an earlier phase in his writing, it looks as if the mother is the main character, with the father absent and the child as a listener. The mother is the only one who has an active voice in this song. But as we saw in our previous lectures, by the early 1910s, Shalom Aleichem had found his main character for this role. It was Motel Pacey, the cantor's son. So eventually, it was a child who carried the mother and the future of your Jewish existence across the Atlantic. And for Shalom Aleichem, it would be the child who also carries the narrative of Jewish mass migration in Yiddish. And as we discussed in the second lecture, Yudalet Berkovich chose the mother, Old Devorah, to tell this story. And we know that she tells a completely different story. To fully appreciate what Shalom Aleichem achieved with this song, and to understand why it immediately became a folk song, we need to understand the historical moment in which he wrote it. The year 1892 marks the third decade of Jewish migration to the United States, or to America in general. A mass movement that would eventually transport more than 2 million Jews across the Atlantic between 1880 and 1924. What drove this exodus? Several factors converged. In the Russian Empire, following the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881, the government implemented increasingly harsh anti-Jewish legislation. The May laws of 1882 restricted where Jews could live and what occupation they could pursue. Violent pogroms swept through Jewish communities. Economic conditions deteriorated. For many Jews, there seems to be no future in the old country. America, on the other hand, represented the opposite of everything they were fleeing. While Russia imposed quotas and restrictions, America, at least in theory, offered opportunity based on merit rather than birth. While Eastern European Jews faced violence and persecution, America promised religious freedom and the protection of law. While poverty trapped families in the shtetls, America's rapidly industrializing economy needed workers and rewarded hard work. Or so the letters home claimed. The reality, as we know, was often much more complicated. And notice also what Shalom Aleichem doesn't tell us. We don't know if the father did send the money or the photograph, or if he did send them a ticket to come. We don't know if the gut kvittel had arrived. The song ends with the mother still singing, still waiting, still hoping. Our second lullaby is perhaps the most famous Yiddish song written. Avram Goldfaden's Rozenkes mit Mandeln, Raisins and Almonds from 1880. Avram Goldfaden was the father of Yiddish theater. He founded the first professional Yiddish theater company in Romania. He included this lullaby in his 1880 operetta Lullabies, a romantic drama set in ancient Jerusalem. Goldfaden's version is based on an earlier folk song in a different version, but his version became very well known. Let's read the Yiddish song first. In dem Bet HaMikdash in a Winkelcheder sitzt die Elmone bat Zion allein. Ihr Ben Yochidl Yidlen wiegt sie keseder und singt ihm zu schlafen a lidle schein. Eililulilulilu. Unter Yidles Wiegele steht a chlorweiß Ziegele. Das Ziegele ist gefroren Handeln. Das wird sein dein Beruf. Rozenkes mit Mandeln. Schlaf je Yidele, schlaf. In dem Lidl, mein Kind, liegt viel Nevies. Als du wirst einmal sein zu seit auf der Welt, als Seucher wirst du sein, von alle Tevues, und wirst in dem euch verdienen viel Geld. Und als du wirst werden reich, Yidele, sollst du sich dermonen in dem Lidl, Rozenkes mit Mandeln. Das wird sein dein Beruf. Yidele wird alles handeln. Schlaf je, Yidele, schlaf. Now let's read the English translation. In the temple, in the corner of a room, a widow, a daughter of Dion, sits alone. She is rocking her only son, Yidele, ceaselessly, and singing him to sleep with a lovely little song. Lullaby. Under Yidele's cradle is a snow-white little kid. The kid is going off to trade. This will be his calling. Raisins and almonds. Sleep, Yidele. Go ahead and sleep. There will come an era of railroads that will cover half of the earth. You will go the length of the iron rails, and when you do, you will earn a lot of money. And when you become rich, Yidele, remember this little song, Raisins and Almonds. This will be your calling. Yidele will trade in everything. Sleep, Yidele. Go ahead and sleep. In Goldfaden's 1880 version, the future holds railroads and commerce. The son will be a soicher, a merchant, trading in grain and earning viel Geld, a lot of money. But let's go back and see where the song sets the scene. In the temple, in the corner of a room, a widow, a daughter of Zion, sits alone. This is not an East European shtetl. It is not contemporary Russian Empire. This is Jerusalem, the temple, the ancient sacred center of Jewish life. The song creates a mythic origin for the Jewish lullaby itself, reaching back across 2,000 years to imagine a Jerusalemite Jewish mother singing to her child in the holy city. The phrase, daughter of Zion, Bastion, links her to the personified nation of Israel itself. She is both a woman and a nation, an individual and part of the Jewish collective. And as we saw with Sholem Aleichem's poems, one mother and one child can represent in many ways the contemporary Jewish family in the Russian Empire. Now let's see what is happening in this little room in the temple. Under the child's cradle lies a white goat. The image of the white goat under the cradle is also rich with meaning. It's one of the best-known motifs in Yiddish folk songs and Jewish folklore and literature in general. It goes back to the Chad from the Passover Haggadah, and in the specific context of Jewish life in Eastern Europe, it comes along with the Jewish life in the farm with animals like goats. The goat became a symbol for the Jewish people in general, and this image appears in modern Yiddish poetry as well as art. For example, in our previous lecture, we discussed Marc Chagall's cover for the journal Chaliastre. Chagall included the white goat in many of his works. The Bride may be the most famous one. The white goat represents the protection of the children. But in the 20th century, it was also used by Yiddish poets to question this protection and lament its absence. For example, Itzik Manger, the Yiddish poet, wrote in 1919 the poem Akedus Itzik, in the aftermath of the World War I and the violent riots in Ukraine, which we mentioned also in the previous lecture. Manger writes, Unter Jankeles Wiegele liegt gekeult dus golden Ziegele. Under Jankeles' cradle lies slaughtered or shot the golden goat. Manger's poem is devastating because it takes the most comforting image from Jewish lullabies, the protective white goat, and shows it slaughtered. The security promised by tradition, by the old ways, by the world of the shtetl, and maybe by modernity, has been destroyed. The child is no longer protected. We can see here how the symbol of the goat was transmitted through Yiddish culture and received new meaning and new context. Now let's discuss raisin and almonds. Why raisins and almonds? In Eastern European Jewish culture, this food carried multiple resonances. They represented commercial success, trading in valuable goods, and we saw in the song that the mother wants her child to be a soicher, a merchant, to be rich, to earn viel Geld, a lot of money. They evoke the promised land. Biblical descriptions of Israel emphasize its abundance. These traits suggest personal wealth and collective redemption and return to the land. For example, during Chamishoser, the Yiddish name for Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat, it was common to eat fruit from the Holy Land, or that represents the Holy Land, including almonds, dates, raisins, and figs. The page you see now is a Yiddish songbook published in London around 1900. Look closely because it tells us several important things about how Yiddish culture was changing. First, notice the publisher, the London Hebrew Publishing Company. Yiddish culture traveled with immigrants. By 1900, there were thriving Yiddish-speaking communities in London, New York, and also Buenos Aires, Johannesburg, and more. And they needed or wanted Yiddish songs. Second, we can see the mix of scripts, Hebrew letter for the Yiddish text and Latin letters for the company name. These books had to navigate multiple linguistic worlds. And if you remember, we saw it already in Sarrazon's newspapers in Yiddish in America, where he had the Yiddish newspaper and an English section. So this bilingual or multilingual reality was becoming more and more evident in the years to come. Third, we can recognize the commercial nature. These songs were now commodities printed and sold in shops. This is simultaneously preservation and transformation. When a song moves from oral transmission, from mother to child, and then to print, published by a company and sold for profit, something fundamentally changes. As we saw with the emerging Yiddish press in America, print became a new form of cultural transmission, a way to preserve what immigration threatened to destroy, a way to keep the ephemeral a little more eternal. Now we must leap forward 50 years or so from 1880 Yiddish theater in New York, Odessa, or Warsaw to the late 1930s in Tel Aviv. Nathan Alterman, born in 1910 and died in 1970, was born in Warsaw, then part of the Russian Empire. In 1925, his family emigrated to Eretz Israel, Palestine, where Alterman became one of the most important Hebrew poets of his generation and well after his generation. But although he was unmistakably a Hebrew poet, his poetry contains traces of Yiddish idioms, Yiddish folklore, and Yiddish sensibilities. Let's look at this poem, in Hebrew, Pgisha le'en ketz, Endless Meeting, from 1938. In this poem, Alterman creates a figure of the wanderer, Helech, who is caught by the net of a lover. It is a very rich poem with multiple meanings, and today I just want to highlight 2 lines in this poem. So, as it speaks about him and his lover, or the wanderer and his lover, he says, עד קצווי העצב, עד עינות הליל, ברחובות ברזל ריקים וארוכים, אלוהי ציווני, שאת לעוללייך, מעוניי הרב, שקדים וצימוקים. You can see it in bold letters. And the English translation would be something along the lines of, My Lord has commanded me to carry for you little ones from great poverty, almonds and raisins. So the wanderer offers her shkedim v'tzimukim, rozenkes, mitmandlen, raisins and almonds. The connotation to the Yiddish phrases known to any Yiddish speaker, but not necessarily to the obvious Hebrew readership of the poem, interrupts the Hebrew text and throws the readers to the old world, to the lullaby, to the traditional wish of mothers and sons and daughters. When Alterman wrote Rozenkes mitmandlen into a Hebrew poem, he was deliberately juxtaposing elements that don't seem to belong together, suggesting a Yiddish or a Jewish infrastructure beneath the Hebrew surface. Alterman's poem brings us full circle in our journey through Yiddish in transit. We began with Yiddish lullabies sung by mothers in Eastern Europe. We saw these songs printed in London and New York, commodified and preserved, traveling with immigrants across oceans. We heard them transformed in Goldfaden theater, performed on stages. And now, in Alterman's 1938 Hebrew poem, we find these Rozenkes mitmandlen again, embedded in a modernist text written in a different language in a different land. When Alterman writes Rozenkes mitmandlen into his Hebrew poem, he is performing an act of transit. The Yiddish phrase, carrying with it the weight of Eastern European Jewish life, of mother's dreams, of childhood, of an entire world, crosses over into Hebrew, but it arrives as an echo. Alterman shows us that even as Yiddish as a spoken language was in decline, even as the world that produced these lullabies was being under destruction, the cultural memory embedded in these songs continued to resonate, continued to matter. Over these 4 lectures, we've traced Yiddish culture in transit. We began with the material culture of Yiddish in America. The newspapers, advertisements, the commercial infrastructure of a transplanted culture. We explored Yiddish literature as it grappled with migration, comparing Shalom Aleichem and Yudalet Berkovich's different visions of movement and belonging. We examined the avant-garde movement in Yiddish poetry and visual art, the explosion of modernist creativity in the brief window between world wars. And today, we've listened and read lullabies, the most intimate form of cultural transmission, sung by mothers who hope their children would remember. What unites all these topics is a question of how modern Yiddish culture survived historical changes, how it traveled across oceans, across languages, across the abyss of destruction, and still carried meaning for its readers. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Yiddish in transit, from the printing presses of the Yiddish press to the intimate darkness of the lullaby, and finally to the modern Hebrew poem, where the old world whispers in a new language. May Yiddish flourish and move across time and space in mysterious and unexpected ways, as it always did. Thank you.